cancer on February 6, 1999. If anyone had asked about my thoughts concerning the afterlife at that time, I probably would have told them that once you're dead, that's it. No heaven, no hell, no singing angels, just nothing. As a patrolman with almost 5 years on the job, I was used to seeing dead and dying people. It has a way of making you a realist and maybe a cynic as well. Not long after losing my father, a coworker told me about a TV program called Crossing Over starring John Edward, a medium. I watched the show, but I wasn't sure if it was real. No one talks to the dead, do they? I bought Edward's book one last time and read it with an open mind. It was hard getting through parts of it without becoming teary-eyed, and the more I read, the more convinced I was that communicating with the afterlife could be true. I went on to read other books about mediums and anything pertaining to psychic development. Although my interest in mediumship and communication with the deceased was relatively new, I have had a lifelong interest in other areas of the occult and pretty much anything else out of the ordinary. Around 2000, my police agency went to permanent shifts. I ended up on graveyard, which gave me time on quiet nights to read some of my books and practice psychic development. One simple exercise I liked was to have someone think of a color while I tried to guess it. I soon discovered I could do it fairly well, though I was better able to connect with some people than with others. For example, my friend Joe and I were hired on the job at the same time. Our connection was such that I usually was able to correctly guess whatever color he was thinking. It even got to the point where he would whisper his chosen color to someone and say, "Watch this." More times than not, I would guess it correctly. On September 11th, 2001, I was working inside, assigned to a job we called doorman, which consisted of booking new prisoners and checking in those already in custody. Joe was the desk officer that same morning. I don't remember if the night was busy, but I do remember it was a quiet morning. It was around 7 a.m. when I thought I'd take advantage of the quiet and try my version of remote viewing, which our government spent millions on in a secret program in the early 1990s. There are many variations as to how to do it. My method was to tell Joe to think of a place, any place, but don't tell me what it was or where it was. Then he chose to choose a random number, which he would tell me. While the secret location he held in his mind was somewhere on the planet, his chosen random number gave me a focal point on which to concentrate. In other words, instead of thinking about the entire world, I concentrated only on the number. Think of it as how a bloodhound uses a piece of clothing to zero in on, say, a missing child, as opposed to focusing on an entire forest. I then use what is called automatic writing to draw an image, or what many regular remote viewers called a pictogram. When Joe told me he was ready, I quieted my mind and let my pen go on its own without me consciously thinking about what my hand was putting down on paper. When the time was up, my hand, that is my subconscious mind, had drawn what looked like two buildings, one with a line into it and the other with an angular shape off to its side. When Joe saw what my hand had produced, he said, "Nah, I was thinking about the Empire State Building." Then he added, "But I did think about the Twin Towers for a moment." At that point, I didn't think my picture really resembled either. We finished our shift and went home at 8 a.m. At 8:46 a.m., the United States was shaken to its core by the worst terrorist attack in modern history. I turned on my television and watched as one of the towers burned before a second plane slammed into the other. My phone rang. "The towers," Joe said. "You drew them, but now they're not there." I looked at my drawing. Now I understood it. One building I had drawn with a line into it, and the other with an angular shape off to one side without a line. But I could see now that the shape was a plane pointed at the second building. Wow, that was creepy. The next story is titled Hospitals. Google hospital spirits and you will find links to sites ranging from haunted hospitals to blogs written by nurses telling of their experiences with the spirit world in the halls of working hospitals and those long closed. One blogger nurse warns that if people could see what she sees of the spirit world in hospitals, pregnant women would never birth the children in them. To paraphrase, it doesn't make sense to deliver a child in a place where sick and old people die. If there are no other options, at least first to purify the place of wandering spirits, dark emotions, and thoughts. Then there are hospital security officers, men and women that patrol the busy corridors during the day as well as at night when lighting is dim and shadows deep. They too have their stories. The next story is titled Nurse Betty the Haint. Haints is a deep southern or East Texan word for ghosts. Haint ain't in the dictionary, but back when this incident took place, it was all in the mind of many a Texan, especially those familiar with that great monolith atop the hill. I say many a Texan, but not me. I was a total skeptic. In fact, I was such a skeptic, I was even skeptical of my skepticism. That is until that lone night when I experienced something up on the hill I never had before and never have since. The great building was once a major medical facility called Flo Hospital, and it reigned supreme high above the center of Denton. Both my kids were born there, and nurses wheeled me around in those halls whenever I got busted up as a cop. I thought prisoners inside the place as well as out on the grounds, and I also investigated shootings, suicides, and killings in and around the parking lots. Over time, modern hospitals were built around town, and Old Flo began to lose business. Owners changed, but that didn't help. It shut down, and not long after it was empty. Someone, or maybe a business or corporation, owned it then, and they hired our police department to work security in the mostly empty building. The front office stayed open evenings and nights for a while. Other officers and I worked it 3 or 4 times a month for years. An easy overtime gig that cops everywhere have always loved. Mostly we walked the halls of the 3-story building, which included a morgue and a basement. It was a great setting for a horror movie, especially at 2 a.m. on a winter's night. Between the foot patrols, officers watched TV on small camper-style sets brought from home. When I wasn't working patrol, I rode a lot, even practiced my karate katas. It was the 1980s, and it was an easy gig. Easy except for Nurse Betty. She was a young nurse who worked at the hospital years earlier, a real beauty who caught the attention of many of the doctors, but she fell head over heels for one in particular, and since he was already married, they began to secretly date. Then Betty became pregnant at a time when abortion wasn't legal. So one night, the doctor aborted his own child, and without the assistance of nurses, without the right instruments and equipment available to him, he didn't know Betty was bleeding internally. She died in an elevator before she and the doctor had reached the first floor. Soon after, Betty began to haunt the halls of Flo Memorial Hospital. All the veteran nurses and doctors knew about the ghost, but because I was a skeptic, I ignored it until something happened to me too. It was a warm summer evening as I walked into the first floor office, clicked on the TV, and spread several detective cases onto a big desk. I gathered up a handful of reports, stepped into a supply room right off the main office, and headed over to a copy machine. I opened the lid, put in the paper, and hit the buttons. It was a routine I had done many times before, but this time, 3 things happened at once. I was struck by a total body, spine, tingling chill that took my breath away. I knew someone was behind me. It touched my back, but yet it didn't. I spun around, but the thing in the corner of my eye moved too, staying behind me over my shoulder and just a hair width out of sight. I saw something, but I didn't. I couldn't have, but did. I spun about twice in front of the copy machine, twice like an idiot. Then the feelings, the electric feeling, and the bone-numbing chill were gone as fast as they came. What in the hell was that? I said out loud to no one. No one. I gathered up my papers and returned to the desk, trying to shake off those terrible feelings, ones I never had before and would never have again. I hadn't been concerned about the hospital ghosts or any other haints for that matter, not even on the lowest subliminal level. I would work overtime there for years. Long after they shut down the front office and moved our headquarters into the empty Years later, an officer wandering the halls at 3 a.m. heard weird noises and went searching. No hints that time, but rather 3 burglars, which he caught single-handedly. I was impressed not just because he wrangled 3 bad guys by himself, but because the officer heard noises in a suspected haunted building, and like Scully and Mulder in the X-Files, he pulled his gun and flashlight and went forth to investigate. I only had 1 file in my personal X-Files, that supply room experience. I was open then, and I still am, to any explanation from any pro in the paranormal field as to what happened that evening. Ain't dizzy from allergies. What I can say for sure is that I had 0 agenda, no dog in the hunt. It was just weird. Eventually, they ripped the structure down, and I heard it was replaced with the University of North Texas dormitory. I wonder where Nurse Betty is now, still haunting those grounds.